Hey guys, what's up? So today I'm going to give you guys a bit of a breakdown on my Jeskai control deck that I've been working on for the Magic Arena format, the Timlesss format here. Now, if you've been paying attention to what's currently happening in the competitive Magic world for the modern format, especially the Pro Tour that's concluded since last week, um, Jeskai Control has been one of the upcoming decks uh, in that in the modern format. It's been outdone by Nadu, obviously. It has a relatively good matchup against everything else, and yeah, I thought I wanted to try it out here on Arena and sort of my take on it. Now, obviously, I don't know if this is particularly the best build. Like my scam deck, I try to make it as close as to modern as possible. Obviously, in Timeless, we do have a couple of card choices that we don't have available in modern that can make this deck even more powerful. But then again, we're also playing against some pretty broken decks in Timeless, so it's kind of like a, you know, you got pros and cons there. But yeah, I want to talk about the deck because I thought it's a pretty fun deck. Now, like any other deck in Arena, it's pretty pricey to make. You're looking at a bunch of mythics, a bunch of rares. You have a couple common cards here, but they don't make up enough of the deck to say this deck is a budget deck at all. Um, I think just looking at it right now, you need about maybe 12 mythics or so, and maybe 30 plus rares. Um, I don't think there's really much you can do to cheat to make this deck a little bit cheaper. Maybe a few cards, but then if you're doing that, then you're gonna be struggling in Timeless just because the format is so fast-paced and strong, almost like a baby of Legacy and Modern. So I wouldn't suggest making the deck if you don't just have the resources. But anyways, let's talk about the deck. Let's talk about um, how I built the mana base maybe and some of the card choices I picked out, and then we'll talk about the sideboard after too. All right, so let's talk about the spells, right? So the main focus of the deck is to be able to cast Phage either to hard cast him or um, in this particular case we're gonna try to maybe even cheat him in using a little card known as Stifle. Now, if you haven't seen Stifle before, it's mainly because it's been banned in every other format that is that has it legal. So Stifle, similar to like Calling Sign of Memory, um, it it does something pretty cool. Since whether we're casting Phage, hard casting it for 3 mana, or we're invoking the Solitude, each of these creatures, when they come into the battlefield, they trigger two abilities. They trigger their main ability, which is in Phage's case to deal 3 damage and heal 3, and it triggers a sack ability. Now, obviously, Phage does not sack itself if you escaped it, but since we aren't escaping it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to stifle it. So what we can do is choose one of the abilities. We either choose to stifle the damage 3 ability or the sack ability. Obviously, for us, we want to hit um, the sack ability, and that goes with same thing with something like a Solitude or any of the elementals that you have invoked or paid using their invoke cost. If you just hardcast them, then obviously the invoke sack trigger won't trigger. But if you did invoke it, then you can stifle the sack trigger. So yeah, so that's kind of like what we have here as a tool that will help us. And not only that, Stifles is just a degenerate, sort of a really degenerate card anyways. You can use it to hit your opponent's fetch lands. You can use it to hit their, certain active abilities of like maybe an Atraxa that's coming in. They're cheating an Atraxa in. You hit their Atraxa ability. You can hit other people's elemental abilities if they're invoking Grief in, and they're trying to Thoughtseize you. You can stifle the Thoughtseize, and then now they have to either they're down 2 cards, or they're forced to try to reanimate it, or they're forced to try to use an undying effect on it, etc. Yeah, Stifle is just a pretty good card, It does have its weaknesses. It doesn't really counter spells, which sometimes this deck does struggle a little bit with, is stopping spells. Like if they're going for a show and tell and they go omniscience, you're kind of like, not looking too great there. But if they go like, show and tell omniscience into an Atraxa, obviously you can hit the Atraxa and that should in theory slow them down enough for you to maybe come back from there. Or maybe you can hit something like if you need to buy time against like a Belcher deck or something, you could hit the Belcher effect. But yeah, Stifle, it's got its pros and cons obviously, so that's why I'm just playing the 3 copies right now. I'm not sure if I want to up the copies, because sometimes if your opponent's playing maybe a mono black deck, mono red deck, they're not gonna have fetch lands, so you might not be able to stifle their fetches, or they just don't have any abilities that you can counter or is worth countering. So stifle sometimes not always the best, and therefore we're just playing the 3. Namely, we're just looking to stifle ourselves more than our opponent. Sword of Plowshare, best 1 mana removal card in the game, especially with the exile effect, really relevant for the Timlesss format. Namely because you're playing against, the Titans, you're playing against the other elementals, you're playing against Uro, you're playing against Croxa, you're playing against Phage. So they're all very good cards to hit. And exile, or if your opponent's trying to scam you, you hit their grief or you hit their fury. Really good. I don't think there's any card to replace this. You could play Path of Exile, but they're both rares, and so if you're gonna craft something, would rather just craft the Swords of Plowshare. Granted, maybe Path of Exile will maybe be used in, I don't know, maybe a modern, or if it ever comes to Pioneer, you can maybe do that, but I don't foresee that coming or happening anytime soon. So it's safe to craft the swords if you're namely going to be playing Timlesss or any white deck. I think you're always going to be playing at least 3 to 4 copies of this card. Unless you're some sort of combo deck, then you probably don't need it. It's also good to hit against Bowmasters, good hit against, yeah, just basically anything that you need to kill. So, alright, so next off, we got the energy package here. I decided to just go ahead and go with 3 tunes. I don't really have the space to play a 4th copy. Maybe you want to. For now, I think 3 is okay. I had to make a bit of concession there to just not play the 4th copy in order to play a couple other card choices. But yeah, so with the energy package, if you don't know, you get 2 energy when you play it, and it's basically a counter. And then you can use those energy to pay for discharge, or pay for Wrath, and you just store them up. So like with Wrath, if you're hitting like a Ragavan, you just need to pay 1. You can store up 2, and then your next Galvanic Discharge can hit for 5 if you wanted to. Or if you've casted a tune previously, you could have your Galvanic Discharge hit for 7. So it just, the more energy cards you play, the better these cards get, and Tune of Narrative just basically helps that. Wrath of the Skies, same thing. You can pour mana into it. If you have a bunch of excess mana, you can like go X is equal to 4 and then just pay 2 energy. Then you'll have 2 more in reserve. It's just overall a really good board wipe. It deals with basically any permanents, save for Planeswalkers. But with Planeswalkers, we have Discharge to kind of deal with Planeswalker, or we have Furies to deal with Planeswalkers. So this otherwise will get rid of any artifacts, enchantments, and creatures that we need to. And most of the time, it's just a two white to board wipe, which is really nice, since if we have played Tune and we have played Discharge, we'll build up that energy counter really quickly. And yeah, it's just really good. So either 3 or 4 copies of this card is probably mandatory. Right now I'm playing 3 because I think I have enough removal across the board to not justify a 4th copy, but maybe you want to play the 4th copy in your sideboard or something like that. Next off, we have our counter spell. Mana Drain is the best 2 mana counter spell in the game, or at least in Timlesss right now. Gives us a bunch of extra mana if we counter something. As long as you counter something like 2 mana, this card is basically kind of free in that sense, right? And then you can use those 2 extra colorless mana to pay for either the One Ring cast your next turn, or you can cast Lauren's Reveal, or you can even cast Solitude if you wanted to, using the excess colorless mana. So yeah, I think that's there's no other reason to play Counterspell over Mana Drain, unless you just don't have the mythics to craft this card. Uh, it is a mythic, unfortunately, and so it is pretty hard to make 4 or justify this if you already have Counterspell. But since I've had a lot of resources, I decided to just go with this. Next up, we have Snapcaster. Now, there is a Jeskai control deck that is playing more of a wizard build. They're playing Tamiel, they're playing Flames of Encore, or Anors, I should say. They're playing Invo's Polarity. I decided not to play any of those, but I still like Snapcaster at 2, mainly because we have so many cheap interaction that I think Snaps is worth playing. And even though it conflicts with Phage a little bit, I think of all the times I cast a Snap, I always had something in the graveyard to cast Snap with. And so I think Snapcaster at 2 has been pretty good. And it allows us to sort of pseudo have 6 counter spells with the 4 mana drain here. If not, then we just, you can always Prowess Share, Snap, Prowess Share, and that should be able to get rid of like potentially 3 creatures for 2 cards. So I mean that's pretty good right there. Or if your opponent's stumbling on lands and they're trying to fetch lands, you can always go Snap, Stifle their lands, or you just need to draw, you can just draw, or additional removal here. I think just overall Snapcaster is just very it's got a lot of utility in this particular deck for really cheap, since you have so many 1 mana interaction right here. Next off, we have Teferis. Teferi, sometimes you resolve Teferis, you just win. Yeah, it's not really much to say about it. It's one of our ways to get rid of Blood Moon. Our deck is very weak to Blood Moon. Even though we're only 3 colors, none of our lands are really basics, because it's really hard to play too many mono-source lands, just because Phage is very hard to cast if you do that. So hence why we're playing a bunch of dual lands, even trinomes and things like that, just to get Phage online as soon as possible. So we can't really afford to play too many mono sources. Therefore, we're really weak to Blood Moon, and Teferi is just one way to get rid of it. We're not too weak to Harbinger or Magnus, because we have Solitudes, which can be cast for free to get rid of those particular creatures. Phage or Teferi also helps against the One Ring a little bit. If they're playing the One Ring, we don't really have a way of killing the One Ring other than just killing them. So if you do cast Teferi and you bounce the One Ring, hopefully you have mana for Mana Drain, or if you're playing something like Spell Pierce in the main, you can hopefully do that to sort of force him to stumble a little bit. But yeah, Teferi, I think overall is decent at 2 here. Maybe 3, but I decided to side a 3rd copy there. Next off, we have the One Ring. Basically, replaces all of our Planeswalkers, all of our other forms of drawing outside of Tuna Narrative, and Snapcaster or something like that. So our only other way of getting advantages with the One Ring is the best draw engine in the game, outside of Neko Dominance and Neko Potence. It works really well in this deck, mainly because we have Mana Drain and we just have extra mana, colorless mana. We just pour it into casting the One Ring. The damage that we take from the One Ring can be recovered using Phage, which is also really good, or Solitude. Oftentimes I have like 30 life, maybe even like 20 something life, and so the One Ring, we can always just keep drawing with it, which is really good. But yeah, overall, really good card. The only way for our opponents to really interact with it, from what I've seen, is if they have Oko, they can just Oko the One Ring, which kind of sucks, turns into a 3/3, but it's not the end of the world. Still just a good card in general. I wouldn't cut it in this particular deck, because I think you really need it to play this deck effectively. So it's one card I don't think you can really replace. You could try playing like 5 mana Teferi, or Jace. Obviously the 4 mana Jace is not in the game, but it just won't outpace the One Ring. Then we have 3 Solitudes. You could play Subtlety also. I decided just to stick with the Solitude just as removal. Um, with Subtlety, you do have enough blue spells to make it useful, but I think just the Solitude, just overall, just hard removal is just good enough. And obviously, it's got lifelink, which is also really good for us since we're playing the One Ring here. Not much to say about it. 4 copies might be too much, namely because we already have 4 swords to Plowshare, so I don't think you really need a 4th copy, per se. Um, maybe I don't think so, but yeah. Anyways, moving on, we have 2 Lorens revealed. This acts as our lands, or at least our additional lands if we need to get island, sanctuary, or anything else. Because we're only playing 23 lands in here. So I decided to play the reveal because we're also playing a couple of cycling cards. So I thought playing 23 lands is good enough. I don't think you need a 24th land or 25th land like in our usual control decks. So yeah, 2 Lords reveal, pretty good. Also works really well with mana drain. Draw a bunch of cards. Obviously, be careful of the Bowmaster if you do decide to do that. All right. So next off, let's talk about the mana base. I think the mana base is the most difficult thing about building this particular deck. Um, it looks like it should be easy, but from my experience so far playing about 10, 15, 20 games with this deck, the mana base has been weird. And I think that's even true for modern. What they have in modern that we don't have here is the filter lands. Because we don't have like Mystic Gates, we don't have the other color filter lands. It makes Phage a little bit harder to cast if we don't have just potentially all dual lands. So that's what I try to do. So I try to either go for all dual lands or at least one trinome here, or if my mono source lands, they should contribute to casting Phage. Hence why we have I'm okay with the Arena of Glory, the Mountain, and the Plains. And for our mono blue sources, I just went with 2. So obviously island for island. The 3 basic is basically just to play against Fill the Dead, or sorry, not Fill the Dead, Fill the Ruin. So they fill the ruin us, we can just get these, or if they assassin trophy or something like that, or presage you maybe. Or if we do run against a blood moon, this is kind of like our only way out of a blood moon. But yeah, only 3 basics. But yeah, for the monosource, blue monosource here, I went with 1 mystic here. Unlike our regular control decks, we oftentimes can't get 3 islands on the board to make this live. And obviously, if you draw too many of these, it's really bad in this deck. And if you draw this as your 3rd land, it's gonna come in tap, and it does not contribute to Phage. But I do think it is still worth running 1 copy because there's been times where like you just need 1 turn to close out the game, and you just need some sort of interaction with your opponent. You always fetch this, grab maybe a mana drain, draw it off with the One Ring, and that way you can just close out the game if you have Phage on the board. So I think having 1 copy is good. I tried it with 2 copies. I didn't like it at 2. I think 1's been working out fine for those situations. So you can either fetch it or you can grab it with Reveal here and then just play it. And hopefully you have 3 irons by the time you do so. Next off, Arena of Glory. Not much to say about this card other than the combo with Phage. So if you escape Phage using Arena of Glory, it comes in, deals 3 damage, and then Phage gets haste, and then it can attack immediately, dealing another 3 damage. So that's kind of like just the thing with Arena of Glory here. It's also nice that it is comes in generally untapped because we do have a couple of mountain. I think we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mountains, so it usually will come in untapped. So not too bad there. Then for our shock lands, we have a total of 6 shock lands here. We have 2 hollows, 2 steams, and I think 1 sacred. I think you can maybe cut down on the steam vents. I'm not too sure yet, but oftentimes I feel like you want a untapped source of mana turn 1, and usually steam vents and hollow fountains is the best ones because it it'll enable Sword of Plowshare and Stifle and Tune, where Sacred Foundry only really enables our removal. Um, so Sacred Foundry is not as good. On top of that, since we're playing Mana Drain, we also need 2 blue sources by turn 2, generally, hence why we're playing more of the blue shocks rather than the Boris color typing lands. Yeah, just giving us 2 blue sources as soon as possible for Mana Drain here. And on top of that, let's talk about the Surveil lands. Surveil lands is really good in this particular deck also. I'm playing 3 right now. I'm playing the Meticulous Archive, the Elegant Prowler, and the where is it? The One Thundering Falls. Now, I don't know if I want to play 4 Surveil lands or just stick with the 3. If I do play the 4th Surveil land, I would probably cut Trinome here. But at the same time, I like the Trinome because it gives you the ability to just fetch this turn 1 and then have any of these spells active if your opponent doesn't do anything, which is what I like about the Trinome. But it's not always something I always fetch first. Sometimes I always fetch like the archives first, just to get the Surveil trigger. So I'm not too sure yet. I think 3 is okay. So that would put us at a total of 4 untapped or tapped lands. So we have the 3 Surveil lands plus the Trinome, which is 4 untapped lands. Sorry, tapped lands that come in tapped. So I don't think you want to increase that number, because then if you do increase that number, then you draw multiple of those, then these become worse. So I think 3 to 4 tap lands is the number to go for, and hopefully you don't draw them. Hopefully you can just fetch them off of the fetch lands. But if you do play more than 4, then you're gonna end up with too many in your opening hands, which would kind of turn off these cards, and that would be really, really detrimental. So I think the balance here is the 4 tap lands. And then for fetches, we have a total of 9. Yeah, 9 fetches. Some people play 3 Tarns and 2 Mesa. I didn't have a second Mesa, so I'm just playing the 4 Tarns, the 4 Flood, and the Mesa. It should be able to get us almost everything in our deck here. I think the Mesa can't obviously get any of the islands here, and then the Tarn can't get us planes. But other than that, I think this is kind of like the right number of fetch lands to play. You could play maybe 10 or 8. But I think 9 is a pretty good number for this particular deck. So that puts us at 23 lands. Pretty decent mana base there to get us going. In terms of Cyborg, I haven't really tested the Cyborg out too much, but it's just some ideas I had. But let's talk about it anyways. So Consigned Memory, this is just to play against Eldrazi decks if they're trying to play like Ulamog or Emrakul on you. That's namely it. It sort of overlaps with Stifle, so I don't think you need to play more than 2 copies. Yeah, so with Consign and Stifle, you have plenty of ways to stop trigger abilities, so I don't think you really need more than that. Alright, so for the artifacts here, I have a couple of Graveyard Hate cards. I have Lanterns, and this is namely to be used against other Phages, other Kroxa, other Titans. That's what you namely want to use this for against, or maybe if you're playing Phoenix, you can play this against Phoenix. It'll help you there. Stone of Erich is kind of nice in the sense that it works against Invoke Elementals. It works against Titans. If they hardcast the Titans, it just gets exiled. If they try to cheat in a invoke any of the elementals, it gets exiled if they die, and they can't use undying effects on it. So yeah, we're playing the 1 copy because it's also a legendary artifact, so I don't want to draw too many of these. And yeah, overall, it's also another Graveyard Hate card, so we have a total of 3 Graveyard Hate cards there. Vexing Bauble, also another fantastic card for our sideboard. Stops the Invoke Elementals, stops any Omniscience play, stops any Cascade decks, So overall, gives us a pretty good coverage of hate. And what I like about these artifacts is that if you do have Wrath, or if you need to Wrath, you can always just tap and sack them all for 1 mana, just to draw a card, so you don't lose out on your card advantage. So you can tap out and sack to draw 1 card here. This one requires 2 mana, but still pretty good there. But yeah, so overall, these should not conflict with Wrath of the Skies. Compared to something like uh, compared to something like Chalice of the Void, which Wrath would probably kill. That and Chalice of the Void doesn't do that well, especially with playing so many 1 mana spells. We can't really go Chalice on 1. Chalice on 0 is nice, but then if you play Wrath, then you would kill your own Chalice. But these cards overall here, at least they have the ability to sack and draw, or if you draw multiple of them, you can just play them, sack them, draw a card, and just cycle them that way. Next off, we just have assortment of counter spells and interaction in case we play against a certain deck. Aether Gust is great against Blood Moon, or just red and green hate. Gets under the Veil of Summers, one of my favorite 2 mana interaction or hit cards there. Spell Pierce, because sometimes we just need to stop our opponent's spells. We have a lot of ways to remove creatures, but we have really no ways to remove spells that are on the stacks. So besides mana drain, so this is just to up our density. You can also play something like Spell Snare. You can play something like Mystic Dispute, etc. But I think Pierce is work pretty well for Timeless, since it's a pretty low curve format. So then we have just Counterspell here. This could also be Dovin's Veto if you wanted to. I just think Counterspell is just generic enough to play. If you need more counterspells for whatever reason, you need to counter creatures, you need to counter spells, or just play against the mirror match. Yeah, just more ways to up our counterspell density. Then we have Teferi, just a third copy in case we really need to turn off those interaction. I don't know when I decided in, maybe probably against the mirror match or against a deck that plays Blood Moon or something like that. Yeah. And then finally, just Supreme Verdict, just to board wipe any really big creatures that's untargetable, that has either hexproof or is untargetable, or something along those lines. Namely to hit, I think, Eldrazi stuff. But if they have indestructible, then you're kind of screwed. If they have like hexproof and indestructible, then I don't think there's any way to beat that. In this particular deck, you just have to win some other way. Anyways, guys, that's basically it for this deck. I think this deck has been really fun to pilot. It's not as strong as some other decks in Timeless, namely because most of the decks in Timeless, at least in Best of 1, are combo decks, which we aren't really suited to fight against. We are suited to fight against something like Scam, because all of our cards get rid of like Furies that are on the board, gets rid of if they grief us or they thought seize us, it just puts more food for Phage. So we have a really good matchup against Scam. We don't have great matchup against Omniscience, because unless we draw Mana Drain, we don't really have any way of interacting with their combo as much. Compared to like Scam, if they get Thoughtseize or Grief, you can disrupt their combo. Problem with Scam is if they get out Leyline of Sanctity, that also kind of cucks you from targeting them. So it's kind of like a toss, especially in Best of 1. I think in Best of 3, this deck is an absolute beast of a deck, just because you have so many ways to interact with our opponent, and namely with the cheap interaction, and then we have a couple of late game plays with Phage and the One Ring. Kind of just brings it all together as a really good sort of tempo control deck. Now, I don't know if this deck is better than the Jeskai Wizard or the Is It Wizard deck, but I think overall it plays relatively easy. Like, you're not really playing too many mind games compared to the Wizard deck, where you have to sort of time your Snapcaster, time that you have Tameo on the board, then maybe you Flame of Honor correctly. But with this deck, it's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's really any tricky things you have to do. Other thing with Stifle, Stifle is the one card that you may have to like full control when you cast Phage or Solitude to make sure you stifle the correct thing. So that's just something to keep in mind there when you're playing with Stifle. But yeah, other than that, if you have any suggestions, especially with the mana base, let me know. I'm a little conflicted with Trinome and playing more Surveil lands and the amounts of mono source lands I have. I think this amount hasn't really been too bad. Like I mentioned, I think I played 2 Sanctuaries and it didn't work out too well, but playing one has been working out pretty well as a utility land. You can also play something like Otawara if you want to get rid of Blood Moon or something like that. Um, I opted not to play Otawara just because it doesn't work well with Phage again. Once again, I think I'd rather just get the Mana Drain um, or Stifle or sort of Plowshare with the Aurora, or sorry, with the Sanctuary rather than playing the Aurora. Alright, guys, that's all I got for you guys. Let me know what you think, and see you guys next time.